Chapter 4. The Ineffable Detective Power. Policing in the age of Victoria Regina was in shambles, a tossed salad of do-gooders, cops on the take, and brutal dictators drunk on too much power and insufficient oversight. As went England, so went Canada, and the nation's fledgling system of law and order was no exception. England's paragon of crime-busting, New Scotland Yard, was still cutting its teeth, and Canada had yet to conceive of its sequel. The crime-fighting ethos at the turn of the 19th century was one of prevention rather than solution. The cop on the beat spent his days enforcing bylaws, not collaring the city's riffraff. As a consequence, corruption was rampant and almost any offense could be overlooked for the right price. A series of comedically inept attempts at altering public perception of law enforcement failed miserably. By mid-century, the image of the uniformed officer patrolling the street, keeping harm at bay, had become a cynical joke. As one astute observer wrote, the force was nothing more than burly policemen, hunting in couples and used to decorate the entrances to the theaters. As the century waned, Halifax waxed. The port city, willing to turn a blind eye to more than most, grew in leaps and bounds, bloated with waves of immigrants and groaning under the weight of its accumulated urban blight. The Halifax Police Department was established in 1864 to instill some sense of order in the lawless metropolis. One of its first recruits was an earnest mountain of a man named Nicholas Power. The day he reported for duty, he was all of 24, full of piss and vinegar and unearned swagger. Before joining the nascent force, Power had spent 4 years in the Royal Navy, serving aboard the HMS Nile as a butcher's boy. As criminals ran riot through the steep streets of the Big Smoke, Nick Power quickly learned that sporting the uniform afforded little cachet. By that time, fighting crime was largely confined to corralling drunks. Public intoxication was public enemy number one for the Halifax PD, followed closely by such mundane offences as common assault, theft, disorderly houses, profane language, and cattle at large. Young Mr. Power soon distinguished himself despite such banal adversaries, boasting an impressive arrest rate and a keen eye for spotting the criminal element. It was this latter trait that garnered Power his first promotion. In November 1882 Power was named the department's sole detective. With his new rank came a number of perks, including an annual salary of $500 and a clothing allowance of 1 suit per year. Nattily attired and released from the burden of herding cattle and rummies, Power was free to focus on a new avenue of police work, identifying and apprehending the unknown perpetrators of crimes already committed. One of his earliest cases set the tone for the career that followed. Nick Power was dispatched to a robbery on Morris Street, the Tony home of the affluent Albro family. That night, the Albros had attended mass with their 2 servant girls, leaving the house unattended. They returned to discover more than $1,000 worth of jewelry and silver plate missing. The newly minted detective quickly surmised that the burglars must have entered through the front door and exited from the back, leaving the door ajar. Marks on the backyard fence indicated their escape route. Wax stains throughout the home hinted that the robbers had used candles to light their way. Power even found a candle stub near the backyard fence, buried in the grass. Power examined the candle with great interest, much to the bemusement of his fellow officers. He thought it stubbier than most, yet it bore no identifying marks. After a restless night pondering this lone elusive clue, Power sprang into action. He sent out a team of constables to query the city shops, looking for a match to his wax specimen. His instructions were met with derision by the junior officers, who saw it as a fool's errand, but their diligence eventually paid off. Thomas Leahy, a shopkeeper at the head of the market wharf, claimed to be the only merchant in the entire city to carry that particular make of candle. As luck would have it, it was brand new stock and he had only sold 1 allotment to date, 2 boxes to the Royal Artillery Canteen. It was Power's first real lead and he made a meal of it. While interrogating the homeowners, Power discovered that the Albros' 2 servant girls were keeping company with some artillerymen. The detective then paid an unannounced visit to the canteen, where he learned the girls' beaux had access to the candles. Based on this rather anemic chain of circumstantial evidence, the soldiers were arrested and convicted, along with their servant girl paramours. The detective's powers of deduction soon caught the eye of the city's newshounds. Reporters pestered him for the intricate details of his cases and Power was only too willing to oblige. The Halifax tabloids overflowed almost daily with the detective's latest exploits. Without fail and no matter how daunting the crime, Power somehow found the missing piece of the puzzle and brought the slippery villain to justice. The press often likened Power to Sherlock Holmes, but only because Power asked them to, though the detective then feigned discomfort at the comparison. Nick Power, a man imbued with media savvy decades before the ailment was formally recognized, played the part of the humble public servant to perfection, an act that took considerable pretense given his love of the spotlight and his insistence that his every move be reported to his adoring public. Never had the media met a more accommodating lawman. Power was not only cunning, he was photogenic. The detective cut a dashing figure, straight out of central casting. Tall, regal and endowed with a strong physique and rugged constitution, Power was every inch the equal of his fictitious contemporaries. His leading man looks may have landed him on the front page, but his exploits kept him there. Of all Power's high-profile, and highly profiled, cases, one stands head and shoulders above the rest. The detective's magnum opus was a perfect media storm. Power was in rare form, the perpetrators were American, and the victim was no less than a crown prince and future king. It was all too PG good to be true, and would eventually be revealed as such, but the caper forever cemented Power's reputation as Canada's greatest detective, if only in the Halifax press. The legendary caper unfolded in the final days of October 1883. Power, still the city's lone detective, was playing a hunch. He spent the day checking out the latest arrivals in some of the downtown's less reputable hotels, searching for anything that made his nose twitch. He noticed two young Americans whose nervous demeanor set off his finely honed criminal radar. As the two men left the hotel, Power took the opportunity to search their room, as was his prerogative in the days before warrants and the mandated protections of civil liberties. Power soon found a 48-pound bag of dynamite underneath one of the beds. When the pair returned to their lodging, Power promptly placed them under arrest. Rummaging through their pockets, the detective came upon some luggage tags for the local depot. With tags in hand, Power raced to the terminal and claimed the waiting baggage. As he forced open the suitcase, Power's hunch was vindicated. The trunk contained 2 diving suits and what Power later claimed was a terrorist's kit, complete with all the necessary paraphernalia to detonate dynamite underwater. Back at police headquarters, Power grilled the men for hours alone in a room with no windows or witnesses. When the detective emerged, he had a fantastical story to tell. According to Power, the men intended to blow up the HMS Canada, presently lying at anchor in Halifax Harbour. Aboard the vessel was none other than Prince George, who was later crowned King George V, sovereign of the British Empire. The two conspirators, James Holmes and William Brechton, were supposedly outraged by the settlement of the Irish land question and claimed to be part of an international conspiracy looking to strike a blow against the English nobility. Headlines across the country trumpeted the foiled plot, heaping laurels and platitudes on the quick-witted gumshoe who had brought the would-be assassins to heel. Although Power told every pundit who would listen that he had ferreted out the treacherous cabal, exactly how much of the plot and so-called confession were true remains an open question. One clear indicator of the case's dubious merit was the verdict. The two putative terrorists were convicted of a single relatively minor offense, the illegal possession of dynamite, and were sentenced to a mere 6 months, an almost imperceptible slap on the wrist for allegedly plotting to kill a member of the royal family. The court's ruling, however, did little to dampen the newspaper's ardor for the detective. In the immediate afterglow of the arrest, nestled in the media's warm embrace, Power cultivated a reputation for being able to see around corners and into the souls of men. Power's fame soon spread beyond Halifax, propelled by tales of his much-lauded eagle's eye, sharp wits, and deductive reasoning. As the province's only detective, he quickly found himself in high demand, dispatched to wherever wrongdoing occurred. And so it was that on January 28, 1896, as he closed the book on yet another headline-grabbing case in New Glasgow, Power received an urgent cable from the Solicitor General, instructing him to proceed with due haste to the tiny village of Bear River, to see what he could make of the horrific murder of a 14-year-old girl.